During the Blitz, it seemed to be they were trying to set London alight. They were dropping incendiaries, so they could see where, once the incendiaries took hold, they could see where the fires were, and then feed more incendiaries into it.
An incendiary bomb, the kind that the Germans were using, was about 2.5 inches diameter, with a small set of fins on the back end, and it was primarily made up of magnesium. And when it hit, as long as it hit in the correct manner, the igniter would blow up and the whole thing would become a magnesium torch. And they used to drop a lot of these all over the place, but mostly over London. A lot of them didn't explode because they had to land just right for them to go off. And I knew friends of mine that had them standing on their mantelpieces. Another thing they used to use was what we used to call a bread basket with oil bombs in it. Now this was literally a big, like a basket container, which would be filled with oil bombs, which were a bit like hand grenades filled with oil that would explode and throw flaming oil out. Okay. What a bomber would do is drop one of these baskets, which would open out and shower maybe a couple of hundred of these things that would come out of it.
They took all the signposts down and all the signs of the train stations, so that if the Germans came, they'd get lost. I mean, you could get lost now when there's signs up, can't you?
No signs.
No signs.
No street signs, no town signs.
And if anybody asked where they were, they were suspected of being a spy.
They used to drop those landmines with parachutes.
Yep.
That's true.
In fact, we had a landmine right down the street from us, blew our windows in. A landmine was literally a mine, and it was a naval mine. At one time during the war, the Germans used this. They would take a naval mine and drop it by parachute, and it would swing down the parachute and then hit some object and explode just like a mine. And one of them wiped out about 10 or 15 houses. And every time there was a bomb in a street, the authorities would fence the street off. But I remember the fence for that particular one was right outside our front gate. We were the first house that wasn't fenced off.
They virtually ringed central London with these huge balloons, which they were tethered to steel cables from the ground. The point being that to keep the aircraft up as high as possible, if they came in below the balloons, they didn't know where the cables were. If they ran into those cables, the plane would probably lose its wings or whatever. So the idea was to force aircraft to do their bombing from a greater height. But every now and again the cable would break and one of these would just go floating across the sky.
And I can remember towards the end of the war, the V1 and V2 bomb. The V1 was the pilotless flying bomb that was launched against England. The V1 was like a little aeroplane.
Doodlebugs, that's
It had a pulse jet engine mounted above the fuselage. Right?
you see it go
And it would fly until hopefully in some predetermined moment the engine would cut out and it would dive down. Well, they had a habit of always turning around and impacting somewhere they had recently passed over. If it passed over you and then quit, that's when you had to duck. Many of them didn't fly very high. They were not a very efficient device. But I can remember I had a paper route and I was delivering the morning papers down our own road, which was like a 2-mile long residential street. And one of these doodlebugs comes, it couldn't have been more than about 10 feet above the houses, and it comes straight away down the street. And now in those days I used to make model aeroplanes. And I had an idea, and I'd already started work on it, to make models of these doodlebugs and sell them. So I'm out there observing this one. I can see the rivets, I can see everything. It was so low, and a great big hairy arm wraps itself around my stomach, lifts me clean up off the ground, and I'm fighting like mad because I want to watch this thing, And I get dragged into one of these surface shelters where some guy who, he was rescuing me, I used to do this paper round for 7 shillings and 6pence a week. I ended up with the final bit of information I got from that sighting. I ended up making little doodlebugs, and I was selling them through our newspaper shop for 7 shillings and 6pence a week. Each rather. Yeah. I sold loads of them. So every one I made was equivalent to a week's pay for me. I made them out of, you couldn't get balsa wood in the war, They had another wood called obishi, which is almost as light as balsa, a bit harder. And I made them out of that, plus dowels.
They had a V2 which never made a noise at all, did it?
Well, the V2 was a
The
rocket.
rockets went up and came down, so you didn't hear a thing.
A regular ballistic rocket.
The first one they had was at Hounslow, 10 miles maybe from where we lived. We were told it was a gas main that had exploded because they didn't know what it was. Because, you know, out of the blue there's an explosion. They were launched from Germany.
And the German planes coming in, they had a funny...
Yeah, you could always tell the
German
sound of a German plane as opposed to an Allied plane. The reason was they didn't synchronise the propellers. So the noise came as a throb. You go, But anyway, all the Allied planes had synchronisers and it was a constant sound. So you could always pick them out.
Do you remember Poolboxes? They were octagonal, I think, weren't they? Concrete bunker things?
They were mostly concrete emplacements with very thick walls and a thick roof with slits through which you could fire guns, machine guns, rifles, whatever.
Too.
They were in strategic places all over the country. Awful lot of them along the coast, and on major roads there would be installations to control various points. The Germans dropped a lot of these anti-personnel devices. They were funny looking things, and some of them looked a bit like big butterflies. And the idea was if you picked them up and fiddled with them, they would explode. At least blow your hand off, maybe kill you. And they were literally for anti-personnel terror.
Yeah, they'd come around the school with big posters, don't touch this, don't touch that.
As soon as they had isolated a particular kind, they would publish it. This is one of them.
I think you grew up a lot quicker then, didn't you?
Yeah, I think we all did, yeah. You got to understand that it was a way of life. You know, it wasn't something that happened occasionally. We lived this.